All right, so today we're going to put together the plumb bob model. So I've got my two files, the cap model and the plumb bob model. Um, the cap model all set to go, and the plumb bob model in a separate file also all set to go. And then you want to make sure you have a third file, okay, using the same millimeter template file. Okay, it's got to match all the rest of them. And the reason for this is we want to keep each of the parts separate and clean. Okay, so if we need to do something with the part, we're not messing with anything else. Okay, and we're keeping everything separate, everything clean, and it's just easier to deal with managing all the parts that way. Okay, so in my separate drawing file, all right, I'm going to use the Insert tab. And just like we did previously with other drawings and whatnot, we're going to insert as blocks. So I'm going to go down here to Insert and insert more options. And I'm looking in the drop down. There's nothing there. So I'm going to browse to the proper folder here. My 110 class, my plumb bob folder, and I've got my two files here. So first one I'm going to drop in is the cap. I'm going to hit open. Looking at the prompts here, I don't really need to do anything. Scale should be 1:1. No rotation. I can fix all of that after the fact. So I'm just going to hit OK and left click to insert it. All right, then I'm going to use my shift key and the middle mouse button to kind of orbit and see what I've got going on here. Okay, and the same thing. Go back to the Insert tab, down to more options for Insert block, and selecting the plumb bob model. Same thing. Hit OK. All right, so everything is coming in based on how I had things laid out in each of those models. Okay, so if I had them laid out in a top view, they'd come in with the top view relative to our new drawing. All right, now the first thing I want to do is change the visualization style. All right, so I can see maybe a little bit more clearly. Maybe I'll use realistic this time. About what it is that I have to put together, how it's going to look. All right. Now the big thing is that when you hover over the part, notice what it says. It says that it's a block reference. Okay. This isn't a big deal right now, but when you want to start applying materials to it, you're going to have an issue because it's coming in as a block. Okay. If you have a block for 3D parts, materials will not be applied to the block. All right, so basically the first step after this, or the second step rather, is to explode the block back to their original state. All right, so I'm going to type in explode, and I'm going to select both objects. Hit enter or right click, and now when I hover over, it says 3D solid. Okay, 3D solid, that's my check. It doesn't say surface, it doesn't say anything else. If it does say those things, you modeled it incorrectly. All right, so you want to make sure that it always says 3D solid. All right, so now that I've got the 3D solid, I basically have to use the align tool, or the 3D align tool, which I showed you guys previously. So I'm going to type 3D align. Here it is down here. And the first object that I select is the object that I want to move. Okay, so I'm going to move this cap. So I'm going to select the cap and hit enter. Specify the source plane, orientation, or specify the base point. All right, so my base point is going to be the center of this cylinder at the very bottom. Okay, so I'm going to left click on that center point. Now it says specify a second center point. Well, I'm really going concentric here, so I don't need a second center point at this time, or a second point at all. So I'm just going to hit enter. And now it's giving me the option to specify the first destination point. Okay, so my destination point right now is going to be the first circle up here on the plumb bob. I find that center and I hit enter. Okay. Now because I only used one point, it didn't do any rotation. Okay, if I did top or bottom and top, I probably could have aligned it right away to the bottom and top center points of that cylinder. All right, but because I have this at that center point, I can use my rotate gizmo. I got to change out of 2D, sorry. Change to my 3D basics. I'm going to left click, go up to the selection area, change to the rotate gizmo, and I'm going to follow the green line. Actually, I should probably take this from that center point and bring it to that center so I have the appropriate pivot point, right? Rotating on the green. And I want to be 90 degrees, so I type in 90 just to be safe. Okay, and now I can do this by eye. I'm going to use the move gizmo. And I'm going to take that red arrow along the proper axis. All right, now, again, you don't have to do it by eye. You can actually say, yes, I want the center. I want the center of the bottom part of this head to be coincident with the top center of the plumb bob. Okay, you can do it that way as well. But basically, we're going to be moving this around so that we can set up our particular shot. Okay. Now, the next thing I have to do is figure out how I want this to be viewed on Paperspace. All right. So usually what you want to do is you want to pick an isometric corner. That's going to be one of these corners, the top left, the top right, or bottom left, bottom right. So northwest, northeast, southwest, southeast. Those are the corners that you want to work with. So set yourself up in the proper isometric orientation using the view cube. Okay, that you're going to pick the little corner box. And you'll see what that's going to look like. Is that the view that you like? If not, you can try some of the other views. Okay, is this the view that I like? Or maybe is it northeast? Okay. I think the northeast orientation is a little bit more standard, but the problem is you're not going to see the hole in the plumb bob. All right, so I'm going to flip it back over to my southwest. Okay, so my southwest orientation, based on how I have the model, I think this will look good. If it doesn't look good, you can select your items, rotate and move and change the planes, and make it work for you. Okay, it's not the end of the world if it's not, if you're not getting the right shot. Okay, now I want to make a copy of both of these elements. Okay, why am I going to make a copy? I'm just going to do Control C, Control V, and bring this over here a bit. One of these is going to be my assembly view, and the other will be my exploded assembly view. Okay, so this one on the right will be my exploded assembly. So I'm going to left click on the bob, or the cap that I just placed in there. And I'm going to pull it out along the axis. Okay. An exploded assembly should basically show how multiple parts go together. All right, so Obviously, if it's more complex, you might have more axes to pull it out from. You might have different stages of the explosion to see exactly what part fits into what and in what order. Okay, so I've got my exploded assembly view set up. I've got my assembled view set up. And now I'm going to go to Paperspace. Okay, so in Paperspace, if I double click inside my view here. Now the tricky part is in Paperspace, you may or may not get your navigation cube. Okay, usually when you're in Paperspace, or floating model space rather, you should see the little navigation cube here. Sometimes it appears, sometimes it just disappears on you. All right, but you can always use the second little box up here where it says top for view controls. All right, so I'm going to click on top and Southwest Isometric, and that gives me my view. All right, now again, I want to make sure that I only see one of these. All right, so I need two viewports. So left click outside, select my viewport, and I'm going to close in on my assembly. Okay, hit escape. I'm going to go back to views, drop down my menu bar because it disappeared from me. View, viewports, one viewport, and I'm going to bring it down here. Okay. Left click, go back to the Home tab, make sure that it is on the viewport layer so that it does not print. Okay. Double click inside here and zoom into my Southwest isometric view of the plumb bob assembly. Okay. I'm going to change this to hidden. Okay. Now, the exploded view should always be in a hidden view style or visualization style. Okay. The assembly itself can be in any style that you want. Usually it's in realistic. All right. Sometimes people will have it hidden as well, so you kind of get an idea of what it actually looks like fully assembled. Okay. And I'm just making room. There we go. You see in that time, in this viewport, here I have the view cube and all the controls. Now it decided to come back, so it's random. Don't know why, but it is. Okay. They don't have to be the same scale. Okay, but the exploded view is the more important view. Okay. So I'm going to shift this over to the right a little bit, or kind of centered using Control and the cursor arrows. And once I have this kind of set up, then I need to do my annotation. Okay. With my annotations, I am going to switch over to my 2D tools. So I'm going to go down to the little sprocket or the little gear, go to drafting and annotation. It's just easier to work with if you're not used to using the commands. And I'm going to go to the annotate tab up on the ribbon. So selecting the annotate tab, I'm going to use the multi-leader tool. Okay, now I'm going to have to change what's going on for the multi-leader tool. All right, but multi-leader, specified arrowhead location. I'm just going to pick somewhere, left click, and I might have to redo this later on anyways, but I'm going to type number 1. Left click outside of that. And do it again, multi-leader. Left click, number 2. Okay, now your multi-liters typically have to be in balloon form. Okay, I'm just going to go switch the layer here to be on my dimensions layer so that they're all looking appropriate. How do I get these to be ballooned? Okay, so under the liter style, okay, the liter style, the little arrow that points to the corner, under the annotation tab, I'm going to modify. Okay. And what we want to do is kind of look at the liter structure and the content. Okay, more specifically, the content tab. Okay, so in the content tab, from mtext for the multi-liter type, I'm going to switch it to block. Okay, and then that gives me block options, right? So the source block we want is a circle. All right, I click OK and close. And why did that not change? I'll have to do it using properties then.
Can you put the new one in?
Yeah, if I put a new one, well, let's do that. Let me put a new one and see if that'll work. Okay. It does. They're just absolutely enormous. So that means I have to change my scale for the block, which I can do. Source block. It dumped me all the way out.
Holy cow.
Oh, yeah. Come on. Oh, snaps off. Let's try it this way. All right. Getting closer. I'm going to change the block to a 0.1. That looks a little better.
That's good.
All right, and I'm going to do the same thing with this multi-liter. Tag number 2. Okay, and again, putting these on my dimension layer. Move this out of the way. Okay.
Looking good, Mr. Phil.
All right, thank you, sir. All right, so I've got my balloons. All right, it's a lot easier in inches. You don't have to scale things down, right? But you have to have balloons. Okay, that's how you get your balloons. Annotate tab, liter style, modify the liter, go to content, change the multi-liter type to block, and then your source block is a circle. Okay. Once you've got this, then you create a table. Again, annotate tab on the ribbon, table. And here we just need to figure out what we need. So as far as columns, all right, we can get away with 4 columns, I think. Usually you want to have an item number, a part number, description, and quantity. Okay, later on we can add a 5th column to have material. All right, so why don't we keep it as 5 actually? And then data rows, right? So if I look at data rows and then I look at set styles, first row cell style is the title. Then I've got a header, and then I've got other data, right? So maybe I want 2 data rows. I'm going to left click after I place it, and I'm going to left click outside. You can see that it's really, really scrunched. All right, and I'm just going to stretch this a bit so that it makes more sense for us. There we go. Okay, so the table will be fine. Double clicking in that first cell, yes, it's going to be a little bit out of whack because it's in millimeters. All right, but I'm going to label this parts list. Okay. Or BOM. Okay, for bill of materials. Okay, there's also LOM for list of materials. There are a bunch of acronyms and different versions of things that you can say. Basically means it's all of your parts. Okay, and I'll figure out what I need to change this to, if anything. Left click outside. Yes, it's still really small. So I'm going to double click in there, highlight my text, and change this to about 4.5 inches. Left click outside. That looks much better. Okay. Next, I need item. Same thing. Highlight the text. Change the text height to about 4.5 inches. Left click out in space. Second category. At about 4.5 inches. Part number. Zoom out a little bit. Left click out in space. Third header. Will be part description. Left click outside. Fourth category will be quantity. And then finally, materials. Left click outside. Okay, so this is all handmade, right? You have to propagate the information by hand. Other programs will do it automatically for you. Okay. So item number 1. Right, big number 1. Again, make sure that it's the proper size. Probably want to center this. So let's see, justification, top center. Let's do middle center. Item number 2. Give it a number 2. Highlight. Change the text. Change the justification to middle center. Okay, so the item number refers to the balloons so that you can identify them. Okay, so part number 1, item number 1. Now, we don't really have a part number. Okay, this is typically reserved for some catalog number or a number that is applied to it by the company. So I'm just going to call it part 1 for right now. And do all the same changes. Change the justification. Part 2. And change the justification. Part description. Right? Depending on what it is, the description might be more descriptive or less descriptive than the actual part. So part 1, I'm going to call this cap so that it's not, you don't want to say plumb bob cap. That might be too confusing. But again, making sure that everything is justified. Part number 2. Is the plumb bob itself. Okay, quantity 1. Oops, forgot to highlight that. Quantity for the plumb bob is also 1. And then materials. I haven't set aside materials for this yet, but we'll do that when we get near the rendering stage. Okay? All right, so my table. Also place it on my dimensions layer so you can see a little bit easier. All right, so this is kind of the setup that you want. Your parts list or bill of materials with all this information, an assembly view, and an exploded assembly view. The exploded assembly view has to have balloons and balloon numbers on it. Make sure that both views are in some sort of isometric view. Okay? Sometimes you can get away with like a dimetric or trimetric view, something a little bit off angle, so that you can see how the two parts go together. Okay? When I go to print this, or at least do a print preview, okay, I got to fix my border here, but otherwise that'll look good. Okay, and that's how you set up an exploded view, exploded assembly and assembly drawing. All right,
So what do you call this file now?
this is going to be an assembly drawing. Altogether, it's an assembly drawing.
No, the file name, right?
Oh, the file? The file you're going to save. Good question. I'm going to call this Plumbob Assembly. Okay. ASSY is kind of the shortcut for the word assembly. So now I've got three files: the cap model, the Plumbob model, and the Plumbob assembly. All right, all together making my working drawing set.